Hello and welcome to the Pharma Forum podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Comstock. When it comes to manufacturing in the life sciences, there's nothing quite so daunting as a tech transfer, moving a manufacturing operation from one phase to another or to a new facility or CDMO. Delivering a tech transfer on schedule and under budget is no easy feat, but with the right best practices, it can be done. And on today's podcast, brought to you by Lannett, we're going to talk about some of those standout strategies. My guests today are Grant Brock, VP of Operations at Lannett, and Frantz Maignan, Lannett's Director of Validation and Tech Services. Welcome to the show, Grant and Frantz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to start out, tell me a little bit about yourselves and what your role at Lannett consists of and sort of where your expertise is on this topic we're talking about today of tech transfers. Frantz, why don't you go first?
Certainly. Hello, my name is Frantz Maignan. I'm the Director of Validation and Tech Services at Lannett, reporting to Grant Brock. Let's see. Quick background. I've been in the industry since about 2000. Been doing some form of tech services work essentially since 2001. I've been here at Lannett for about 10 years. Previously, it's Sandow in North Carolina, Patheon, which is now Thermo Fisher Scientific before that, Bar Labs for a period of time in Cincinnati, where I actually met Grant a long time ago. So my role here at Lannett is leading a group of scientists and engineers who are responsible for equipment qualification, cleaning, process, packaging validation, commercial product, technical support, process development, as well as doing the tech transfers. So we've been deeply involved in both oral solid and liquid tech transfers internally.
Hi, I'm Grant Brock, and thanks, Frantz, for that detailed description of your background. And as Frantz mentioned, it's a small world in the pharmaceutical area. We met, back in the 2000, 2001 timeframe. As for me, I'm the head of operations for Lannett. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for well over 20 years. And prior to that, I was in the fine chemical API arena for about 9 years. Various roles throughout my career with lots of different companies, Teva Pharmaceuticals, Aprecia Pharmaceuticals, Bar Labs, to name a few. And my background is on the engineering side. I started out in engineering and worked my way to operations, and now have overall responsibility for all of operations. And so thanks for having me.
So in the intro, I tried to give a little bit of a description of what a tech transfer is, but frankly, I'm a little new to the concept too. I don't come from the CDMO world, so maybe just to start out, give us some context. What are we talking about when we talk about tech transfers? Frantz?
Sure. So tech transfer is really, short for a technical transfer. I guess the best way to look at it is defined by WHO. So it's a systematic procedure. It's followed in order to pass documented knowledge and experience gained during development and commercialization to an appropriate and responsible authorized party. So in plain English, it's knowledge transfer. It's information transfer from a sending site to a receiving site. For contract manufacturing, the same kind of thing. It's a transference for like a product's profile, analytical testing methods, manufacturing and packaging processes from a sending site or the client to the contract facility. Happens at a variety of scales. It could be something that's at bench scale, still very small and experimental, to very large commercial scale, where you're transferring it, from one large manufacturing facility to another. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people do that too. Sometimes it's more favorable cost structures. Sometimes it's maybe more flexibility in scheduling, or you may even have a site that has quality issues, so they want to go somewhere that has a better quality profile.
And I think the thing that I would add to Franz's comments there would be that also could be from companies who don't have an operational site. They're more of a virtual entity, and that their partners in the development side have brought a formulation forward, and they need a commercial home for that product. So there's lots of different elements to it, but I think Frantz described it very well.
So what makes tech transfers challenging? What are some of the roadblocks people run into with them?
Well, with tech transfers, you always get a view into, a product's unique nature, with manufacturing and testing, et cetera. There's a few things that can go wrong that can make them more complicated. Sometimes you can, when you're starting to look at the project, you have the use of novel technologies or ingredients. Sometimes your analytical testing methods can be pretty complex and they're very difficult to transfer. There are some times where you're transferring high potency active ingredients that require special handling. And oftentimes those are at a very low dose, so it can make it manufacturing process is quite challenging. And again, it depends on what scale it is. You can have unforeseen equipment failures as you're working through scale up. You can, as you're commercial, you can have suppliers just discontinuing a key ingredient in the formulation. And unfortunately, sometimes some changes in raw materials that can be detrimental to finished products, like critical quality attributes, can create failures, can create problems.
So these are time sensitive endeavors, right? They have a cost associated with them, and the longer it takes to do the transfer, the more that cost can balloon. Talk to me about kind of why that is, and why it's important to sort of stay on schedule, and whether that's usually a challenge for people.
Oh, let's see. Well, staying on schedule, I mean, it's kind of key with tech transfers. Some of it is obviously credibility that, you know what you're doing. Most CMOs, they're manufacturing and packaging a matrix of products in their facility that are in various stages, and they all have expected dates to market. Sometimes if you are doing a tech transfer, things start to delay and run behind. It has a sort of a ripple effect, if you will, in scheduling with all kinds of other items that are going through the facility. It can impact some of your other customers. The other thing too, if you have bio studies that you have scheduled, timeline slipping can have those dates slip, which can be pretty expensive.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that, just as a more of a high level view, and what Frantz was touching on, is really the commercial aspects, right? There's a business that our customers are trying to operate and run as well. And in order to do that, there's financial expectations and results that are dependent upon the schedules of bringing a product to the market or transferring a product into a new CMO. So it's very critical to their business and their success. And ultimately, we're connected in that way.
So I think we sort of laid out some of the challenges here. What are some of the best practices and solutions to really make tech transfers work, to do them successfully, on time, under budget, things like that?
Well, I think there's several things you could call them sort of a rule of thumb, I guess, if you will. You always want to be wary of assumptions. Those can always come back and haunt you. Good case in point is assuming that maybe a product's characteristics or performance won't change when you change scale. It does. It can. Let's see. Another good rule of thumb is to set realistic expectations and have frank discussions with clients on an optimistic view and a baseline view on what we're going to execute and what the timeline is going to look like. Always better to meet your commitments rather than overpromising and not delivering.
I think when we say rules of thumb and best practices, I often think about, does a company have the ability to execute, and do they strive to excel at executing a project, a tech transfer in the case of our conversation here, and do they have a discipline within the organization that focuses on that with key measures, and just as important, as Frantz mentioned, is the communication with the customer. I think it's very, very important.
Frantz, I want to zoom in on the first thing you said about assumptions and about scale. Give me an example of kind of how that could go wrong. What people might expect to scale in a one-to-one way and it doesn't.
A whole host of things. Let's see. Good example would be going and manufacturing a product. Let's say perhaps it might be something that's a dry blend. So it's just powders that are mixed together without additional processing, made at a smaller scale and blended together. And as you proceed through and compress them into tablets, everything is going, fairly swimmingly. But as you get to a larger scale, sometimes your mixing dynamics can change a little bit. You may have some unforeseen, maybe even static effects. So you may try and go and have product performance that may suffer You may actually have uniformity issues with the distribution of your active ingredient. I mean, those are a couple of things that can possibly change with scale.
Yeah. So attention to detail, sort of as you build these new processes and rebuild them, is really essential.
And I think Jonah, I would weigh in too around the idea that a lot of companies and people may have when they make assumptions would be around similar types of equipment. For example, SUPAC guidelines allow you to move within certain classes, and you may have brand X of equipment, and you're moving to a similar type of equipment from a processing perspective that's brand Y, and they're they're the same. They're in the same class, but the performance is slightly different, and then you end up with a different result. So what it means is that the technical experience and knowledge that the team has around those different types of equipment, different manufacturers, is very important to eliminating and preventing some of the common mistakes that are made.
So let's talk a little bit about cost. We talked about speed and time, and maybe we can tackle both those at once because we talked about why speed is important. But what are some of the things, the steps you guys would take to try to make sure a tech transfer is efficient, stays on time, but also cost efficient?
Well, I think there's a couple of different approaches that you can take. I think to keep costs for cost efficiency and staying on schedule and within budget. Designing and scheduling experiments that you're going to do in your design of experiments, if you will, to maximize the amount of knowledge you gain and minimize the amount of material you consume. It works very well. The other thing too, I think, as you start to develop timelines is, you're assessing the key tasks that you need to execute, and you're figuring out what's critical path items that we can execute and what items we can execute in parallel versus in series, just to save time and get to your milestones.
I think the other thing I would add would be, knowing the right questions to ask of your client. What work has been done to date with the particular product and the key ingredients in that product. For example, have they done any studies on powder flow characteristics? Have they looked at particle size ranges within each excipient or key ingredient, and how that could potentially impact either positively or negatively of the transfer? And so I think considering things like that and making sure that those questions are asked and answered is very helpful in making sure that you can remain cost effective or efficient, as well as looking at it through the lens of meeting expectations and limiting the amount of effort and work required for your DOE experimental work.
Sounds like there's a little bit of the old measure twice, cut once, right? Take the time for the preparation ahead of time, do the experiments, make sure you know everything your client knows that's important before you start the actual transfer.
Absolutely.
For what you guys would call a client or a customer for a pharma company that's looking for a manufacturing, picking the partner is kind of the key, I guess, first step for them. Is how do you know who's going to do these things right and take the right steps and who's not? What are some kind of ways you can think about making that decision? Any red flags to look for?
Some, yes, I would say. I think, finding a CDMO partner that has a history of successful tech transfers is pretty important. And that's demonstrated capability, of course. A red flag is, maybe a partner that has had say maybe a spotty inspection record with their, regulatory agencies, with FDA for our case in the U.S. Partner with a good regulatory inspection history shows that they're, not only do they know what they're doing with the transfers, but they're able to maintain things within quality guidelines. I think, looking for a partner that has a wide array of manufacturing technologies also, it helps increase the likelihood that you're going to have a process that's going to fit the product that you want to move into that facility or the work that you need to get done.
I think, Jonah, I look at this through the lens of, what makes us different? Why do we stand out as a potential partner above and beyond our competitors in the same arena? because I think, as Franz alluded to, there's a lot of companies out there that, they pride themselves on, being a good partner. Uh, they'll have facilities that have a clean, inspection record with the regulatory authorities. They will have, a robust system or process that they convey to their clients, right? Um, and so, what makes us different? I look at it at how many times do you have to reach out um, to your potential partner to get a question answered? What is their responsiveness? What is their customer service culture? Again, because there's a certain level of requirements that you have, right? That I think Franz was outlining to actually be in the business, right? You may not do it well, but you've got to have an approved FDA facility, for example, if you're dealing with the U.S. And you have to have certain, structures in place to be able to run that facility and to be able to be in this business. But beyond that, how are you differentiating yourself to be a partner of choice? And I think there's a lot of things that really tie back to fundamental customer service, excellence in execution, and delivering results repeatedly over time. And if you're a new potential partner with us, you're not going to know the history, right? All companies, I'm sure, will talk glowingly about themselves, right? Everybody's best in class, everybody's great. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the execution, and I think the communication along the way is vital. And while it may go without saying, there are too many times in my experience and our experience in working with partners where the communication just isn't there, and they say they are, but they're not. And I think that's one of the big differences you would see with working with us versus our competitors, is that when we run into issues, because every company, every tech transfer will have its own set of circumstances and hurdles that have to be overcome. It's how the team responds to those challenges that really make the difference in the experience that the customer has. Because what's the last thing a customer wants to hear is, your project's not going to happen because of this. But by the way, we didn't tell you about that issue 3 months ago when we knew about it. We're telling you now after there's too late and we can't do anything to change the outcome. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, and trying to be that transparent, provide consistent communication and touch points for the customer, and they know and can be reassured that if we run into an issue, we're going to talk about it. We're going to engage, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to have a mitigation plan to work through it and address any kind of potential issues that may come up that were not planned or expected.
What are some things that can go wrong and mistakes that the folks can make in doing these tech transfers? What are some of the unexpected things that you're always trying to prepare for?
Well, I guess maybe some of what you just said there. So preparation. So I think, one of the biggest mistakes that companies can make with tech transfers is to really, they shortcut through the project planning phase. If you have a solid project plan, realistic timelines, and milestones, you're going to be successful. You're going to hit it on time and on budget. I think that planning phase is important. And you mentioned before about, getting some of the experimentation done early. It's quite critical.
Yeah, I think I would add that there's always this friction between the commercial objectives and the project timing and planning. Once an organization decides they're going to move a project forward and fund a particular product and bring it to market, the expectation is that it should have happened yesterday. We approved it. Why don't we have it yet? So I think there's a normal friction, right? A normal kind of pressure around that, and there's a normal kind of engagement that exists around hey, what's proper planning versus taking too long. And so I think that's always kind of that engagement on the front end with the customer is very important through that planning phase, but also to be sensitive to their needs, right, from a business perspective, to not, gloss over those and pretend like they're not important to the overall goal of the project, because it's a partnership at the end of the day. And in order for us to win, we need them to win. And so while we can't, if there's a totally unrealistic expectation, we need to be transparent and clear about that and providing feedback. But we also need to provide, hey, here's some opportunities to meet your objectives, but maybe it requires additional resources. Maybe it requires doing something a little outside the box in order to get it done in a reasonable timeline that meets their objectives. So that's another unique characteristic of our company and our approach, and that is that we're willing to walk through those things with our customers and try to come up with creative ways to meet their business objectives, so both can win.
So we have a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to throw one more question in, which is, as you think, from where you guys sit, are there any ways that sort of larger industry trends are changing sort of the demand here for this kind of, well, the manufacturing more generally, and maybe being able to execute a tech transfer more specifically? Just things about sort of like the state of the research or the relationship between the the small biotechs, the big pharmas. What do you see as kind of some of the headwinds you're dealing with?
Well, I can tell you from my perspective. So when we talk about the industry as a whole, I think we've seen a tremendous amount of growth in CDMO activity over the last, I'll say, 5 to 10 years. And that's primarily a result driven by a lot of the branded companies and products coming off of patents and contract manufacturers coming in and buying those facilities with contracts to produce those particular products for the branded companies, which frees up capital and their ability to, invest more money into R&D. I think now we're starting to see. So we had a huge expansion of that activity, and now we're starting to see some consolidation. And you think of Thermo Fisher and Catalent, for example, companies that have acquired and consumed or joined forces with a lot of different sites through acquisition, et cetera. I think we're starting to see now where some of that's starting to break apart a little bit. You get so big, and now we're seeing kind of some transition. There's a lot of small players in the space, and I think you're going to continue to see that over time.
Any other final thoughts as we wrap up here, guys? Anything we haven't talked about yet that you think is important or interesting, or maybe something we have talked about that you want to really drive home?
I think we've covered most of the critical touch points for tech transfers. I think there's so much involved technically that you could probably spend days talking about this. But I think at a high level and giving people a flavor for who we are and what we do and how we do it, I think we've covered it pretty well.
Frantz, anything to add?
No, I think Grant covered it perfectly. Yep.
I mean, certainly I've learned that there is a lot involved here when it comes to tech transfer. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it really does require sort of that really thoughtful thinking it through up front kind of approach, right?
Yes, definitely.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks to Lannett for sponsoring the podcast. And hope you guys have all learned something and found this to be an interesting conversation as I have.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That concludes this episode of the Pharma Forum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about other installments in the series at pharmaforum.com/podcast. The Pharma Forum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, Stitcher, and Podme, where you can find and subscribe by searching for Pharma Forum. And don't forget to visit our website, where you can sign up for daily news and analysis bulletins, and to follow us on Twitter at Pharma Forum. Thanks for listening.